I was watching the Group Up podcast yesterday, and I was getting so damn annoyed because they're going over the skins and stuff like that, and I'm like, I don't care, I don't care, I don't care. And then like every single topic, I have something interesting to add, and they're just basically nodding back and forth because they've talked for so long that they all know each other's opinions already. And the only interesting thing that happens is Avril starts randomly yapping about something he's wrong about, and I'm like, come on, I can input here. I can bring stuff to the conversation. When you talk about Clash and you talk about Push and you talk about the map modes, I can bring stuff to that that's interesting for you to talk about. It's so frustrating to be walking around with my headphones on, listening to it, and be like, oh, I got that to say and that to say and that to say. I'll cover it real quick. The thing with all of the discussion about map types is that the whole point of Payload is that Payload has this thing that moves forward that needs somebody on it. So when you respawn over here, essentially what happens is you get proactive staging, and then the staging gets better for you over time if you're defending. Because the payload is moving forwards, and the more it moves forward, the more of a concave the enemy team can get on you. So essentially what happens is you have a self-correcting system where any advantage the attackers get through getting aggressive positioning because they won the last fight is taken away over time. And also the standard, like, if you have a mirrored map, a 50-50 mirrored map, which is essentially like this whole like push thing they do now, which essentially is like there's the middle and then it just gets pushed through this map. This is New Queen Street, right? Basically from above. Then 3/4 of the time you're going to be fighting here. Like, there's a real hard balancing problem on the map because this is really awful. Oh, the other thing is, if you have a defender's advantage, like you do here on New Queen Street, that's the high ground section, then essentially what happens is you have to keep moving past the defender's advantage, and the more you push in, the more defender's advantage gets better. So essentially we have the standard Overwatch problem, which has always been that the defensive advantages are just way too strong. And then they're talking about respawns and stuff like that, and they're all nodding to each other saying, group respawns are good, group respawns are good, everyone's happy with group respawn, we are happy. But then nobody mentions that group respawns stop the stick figures getting worse, thank you. Nobody mentions that by having group respawn, we stop the texture of team fights, because players, if they all spawn at the same distance away at the same time, they will come back at the same time. And there's no like, one person's further ahead. Like, what do you do when your support's the furthest ahead? How do they fight for space in an interesting way that other players don't? What if your Cassidy's ahead? What if you just have a tank and you only have those resources? It's one of those where it's like so difficult to say that it's good that everyone's respawning at the same time as an objective fact, because it takes so much texture from the game. Because instead of having these like, well, these infinite amount of cases where you got like player versus player and other stuff like that, what you got is you got a team that's staging exactly the same way every single time. Like the Winston's always going to be ahead, the Tracer's always going to be ahead, the Cassidy's going to be behind, and that changes the ways that these characters can stage aggressively. The respawn changes make staggering less important. Yeah, and I think, Lucas, that's a good thing. I'm happy that staggering is less important, but it does take something genuine away from the game, and I think it makes the game, in a very real sense, more homogenized, more than any other change that they've done recently. So it's one of those where, like, that's just one of the topics we covered, and like, I'm going for the Group Up podcast, and I have something interesting to add to every single topic they cover, and I'm like, please let me talk to you and bully you for all your terrible beliefs and other things like this. It's so hard. The standard tank ahead support behind is how the game is supposed to play. It's just Blizzard couldn't teach lower ranks how to do it for so long that he just fixed it manually. No, the game is played in that way, but there is interesting texture when you by default have the Cassidy further ahead than the tank. Now, the Cassidy being further ahead than a tank means the Cassidy gets to fight for that space in a different way than a tank, and that's the interesting parts of the game. Not a fan of them, as I think it's skillful to die at the right time. I don't think I call that skillful. I think I call that a knowledge check for more than anything. I feel like you lost the source on the theory. Low rank Cass goes ahead, dies and staggers. Yeah, I get that. That is experience for the majority of the player base. But the fact that a low rank Cass is the same degree of ahead that they always are, the fact that the Cassidy is always going to be fighting with other people in front of him, is like bad, right? It's not going to be the Cassidy's like closer to the front line. They have the choice. It's not going to be the Cassidy's behind because they're back spawned. How do you play if you're forward versus play if you're behind? It is just my tank in front, me behind, I shoot enemies. I turn up when I turn up and I shoot them. Skill expression is gone, but is that worth getting angry at your teammates for staggering and then staggering yourself because you didn't know better? I agree, but the skill expression is gone, but I don't really care about the skill expression. I care about the variety and different experiences we can have in the video game. The main reason I don't like it is because of the reasoning. They just said that it reduces one-sided games, but that works under the assumption that everything that reduced that must be good, which is not the case. It just ends up ignore the real reason things feel really bad. Guess you're heavily pro 6v6? Yes, I am heavily pro 6v6. I think that the texture provided to the game by having 2 tanks that can support each other with resources is more interesting than what we currently have. I think that in order to make tanks interesting enough to have a stable play rate, in this style of play, we have to make tanks so good that they essentially can just walk over the enemy team in a way that is unfair to low-ranked players because they don't know how to account for that. I think it makes the game more complicated in the worst ways that a hero-based shooter can be complicated. That's my essential argument. Quit tanking Overwatch 2 is miserable. How can one role be so OP but so awful to play? Yep. I think tanking Overwatch 2 has reinforced the majority of the kind of like reasons why people in general don't want to play tank in general. I don't know if you found right, but I think I've got to the core of the arguments, and I think I've passed them out in a way that is more or less convincing to people if they engage properly with the arguments. There is a ton of things that go into why tank feels bad in different games. Okay, there's a ton of things. The main one is responsibility and the pressure of being forced to be the main person on a team, and that has been reinforced to the nth degree in this current format. So like you literally doubled down on the thing that makes tanks the worst in the assumption that cutting the quantity of players by 20% was going to be good enough, but I don't think it is, as evidenced by something queue times. Though it's going to be, to be clear, it's going to be improved real soon, and you can't tell with queue times whether they've expanded the ease of like queuing together, because essentially what you have is like I'll go into how queues work real quick. So essentially what happens with queues, I'll go into here, is you have like 5 different characters, 3, 4, 5. You have a normal distribution, which essentially has a standard deviation and a mean. So all you need is a standard distribution and a mean to kind of like talk about these 5 different players. So what you do is the closer the standard distribution is, the closer it is to like a straight spike, etc, etc, etc. I'm sure everyone's done like basic statistics. I'm sure American education, somebody's done basic statistics. So essentially the closer the standard distribution is, the better the game's gonna be. So you have two different ones of these, 2 different standard distributions, and you essentially compare the average SR, the difference in mean, so the difference in the mean, you compare essentially this in order to know who's queued. If you are individually you could do it individualistically or in terms of queue times. So if somebody's queue time is 10 minutes, when their contribution to so essentially like, the closer the standard distribution is, the better. The closer the distribution, the difference in the mean is, the better. You combine these into a number, and then each of the individual characters has a weighting that you give them from kind of like 0.1 to 2 based on how long the queue has been. So if your queue has been 10 minutes, you get a 2. If your queue has been 0 minutes, you get a 0.1. And essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to either minimize or maximize the number that you pile everything into. And that's kind of like your qualitative number to say how good the game is versus people's queues and versus the distribution. So essentially, like, you're trying to minimize this number. You just queue from the top of the lobby downwards in order to get people in that. Why did I start talking about queue times? Anyway, doesn't matter. Oh yeah, no, I know why I was explaining it. Essentially, like the number that you get, that you're trying to either minimize or maximize for each lobby, and you'll do this on average, so you'll get the average N, where you'll try and get higher, because obviously these lobbies are going to be mutually exclusive. You basically run these through an algorithm and work out all the different combinations and take the top or take the most good for everyone average. And essentially, as queue times goes up, you can just reduce your demand on the N. So you can say like the N has to be like 80% good before it queues a game, and that will run the queue times up 10 minutes, and you can bring it down to 60% as good, and you can weigh these different things differently in order to all like breed into the M, and that can artificially lower the queue times while directly reducing the match quality. Personally, I feel like the match quality has gone down massively. I've played about 20 games over the last couple of days, and almost all of them has been a complete stomp. I blame part of that on the fact that D.Va's so popular and Brig is essentially a complete shutdown to dive. So essentially either teams get run over or they don't get run over and the enemy team just loses immediately. The game's a lot about trading now as well. So the person with the best dive DPS, and if we don't stabilize with Brig, the person with the best dive DPS tends to win more often. It tends to be a lot more swingy, in my opinion. But I can't quantify that. Blizzard wouldn't release statistics even if it was. So it's one of those where it's like, it's a bit, yeah. Least two favorite heroes right now are Brig and Widow. Yeah, Brig is the only character that completely reshapes the game at the moment. Completely reshapes it in a ridiculously strong way. The game is just a different video game when Brig is included. 100%. I agree. But I personally, I think that type of game that Brig is when Brig is included is a more interesting type of video game. Windows Activate? No. No, I'm not going to do it. Just search Mass Gravel GitHub. I'm not going to do that. Do you know why I'm not going to do that? Because it makes you sad. Update way on grind up now. Go 4. Oh yeah, I got into Mastodon support. My Brig win rate. Do you want to see how much you hate me? There you go. There you go. That's how much you hate me. Currently rocking 67. That's with a couple of friend games. Look at that. Look at that. 50-50 on Mercy. 50-50 on Juno. I'll keep queuing and going higher eventually. It's just I occasionally go through phases where I just don't care at all about SR, and I just throw a load of SR by for instance picking Lifeweaver, which I did when it came out. And once you pick Lifeweaver and you throw 3 divisions of SR, you need to gain it back. And that's how many games is that to gain that back? That's like 40 games net. I'd rather just play a different game than play Brig, throwing a bunch of SR by queuing up with me. Brig does change the game in a real way. Brig is busted. Brig's, and I said when the armor pack change came in, the 25 heal, the armor pack change is ridiculously strong, and it was when they reduced the cooldown from like 5 to 4, I'm pretty sure. Brig is just ridiculous at the moment. The ability to reinforce dive DPS and stop people dying through peel, through anything, Brig is just insanely good, insanely OP. People are just really bad at using her for what she's intended to be.